Coming up,
we're closing our account.
From peaceful rallies in the US to violent clashes in France, down under, where young people are skipping school.
I'm extremely worried. I know that my future is at risk.
Environmentalists are storming streets worldwide and turning to the UN for ways to hold polluting countries to account.
When we're trying to hold on to our languages, our cultural practices, our land, and it's slipping between our fingers like that because of the adverse effects of climate change. But we will fight.
We look at predictions about a booming wind energy industry in 2023.
Are renewables, as the fossil fuel industry says, developing into a dirty problem in the future?
And
j'ai de l'asthme à cause du climat.
a groundbreaking case is heard at the European Court of Human Rights. Thousands of elderly Swiss women argue their government is woefully inadequate.
L'État suisse fait trop peu pour le chauffage, pour le climat. On a des conséquences sur la santé, sur la qualité de vie des personnes âgées, de plus personnes, mais nous les femmes sommes particulièrement vulnérables.
This is just 2 degrees on TRT World.
Few people have it in their power to change the course of history. You do.
I got them old school tricks, I got the flavor. You know you wanna do it like that, yeah, do it like us. Pick it up, we gonna keep it tight. Do you see us?
We know young people are driving the debate and action about the climate crisis, but they aren't the only ones concerned about the future. Elderly Swiss women are suing their government before the European Court of Human Rights.
Excusez, j'ai de l'asthme à cause du climat. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai de la peine à parler.
I don't know if she's kidding there, but she is one of thousands of retirees arguing that Switzerland's inaction as our planet heats up puts them at risk of dying during heat waves. They allege violations of the European Convention of Human Rights, including the right to life. And their case uses emerging evidence that older women are less able to regulate their body temperatures than others. The outcome of this case could result in orders for governments to cut carbon emissions much faster than planned. So there's been a lot of environmental activity so far this year. Law students from the Solomon Islands created a stir in March when the UN General Assembly voted to pass a resolution on an issue very close to their hearts and their shores. This is about the promises and commitments that big polluters make to help small island nations and poorer countries. They emit very little greenhouse gas in comparison to wealthier countries, yet suffer heavy damage and losses when disasters like floods and stronger storms hit. Vanuatu, a tiny nation of over 300,000 people, is leading calls to legally hold promise breakers to account. And all the other action we saw in March did well to set the stage for the UN resolution vote.
March was a busy month for climate activism. Environmentalist Greta Thunberg kicked things off in Oslo. She took part in a shut down the state protest for the removal of wind turbines from reindeer pastures. Greta was arrested as she argued that Norway's transition to green energy should not come at the expense of land where Sami indigenous people live.
We want to make it very clear that it's the Norwegian state that is committing the real crime here for violating human rights.
Hundreds of students skipped school on a Friday in Australia at this protest in Sydney. They demanded that no more coal, oil and gas projects be approved.
I'm extremely worried. I know that my future is at risk. I know that we have seen devastating bushfires, devastating droughts, devastating floods across the country.
In Indonesia, one of the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitters, young people warned of consequences for the government ahead of the 2024 general elections if more was not done to address high sea levels and extreme weather.
Wilayah yang terkena bencana akan semakin besar. Wilayah misalnya pesisir utara Pulau Jawa akan semakin banyak yang tenggelam. Sementara wilayah-wilayah hutan akan semakin habis, kebakaran hutan akan semakin sering terjadi.
And in France, explosive confrontations. Thousands of people converged in Sainte-Soline in opposition to a planned water reservoir for farm irrigation. It was just last year France experienced its worst drought on record. It's heated the debate over water resources.
On veut juste que l'eau reste à tout le monde et qu'elle ne soit pas aux mains de quelques privés.
Qu'il y ait des contestations, c'est une chose, mais vous avez des milliers de gens qui étaient simplement venus pour faire la guerre. C'est inacceptable.
There was also opposition to climate-friendly initiatives. Farmers and right-wing politicians in the Netherlands protested against government plans to reduce nitrogen emissions. And in Belgium, 2,700 tractors blocked roads in the capital city as farmers protested moves to curb the production and use of nitrogen fertilizers.
Mes parents ont une ferme, ma sœur, beaucoup des amis de nous ont aussi une ferme et je vois que chez mes amis et ma famille que c'est très difficile pour avoir une ferme qui est bien dans la future où on peut produire des produits comme le lait, la viande et tout ça dans une bonne manière.
Across the world, environmental activism is on the rise, with increasingly urgent language about how human activities harm land and ocean ecosystems.
We are draining humanity's lifeblood through vampiric overconsumption and unsustainable use, and evaporating it through global eating.
And Paris Agreement signatories have been failing to meet targets to reduce the greenhouse gas effect and address climate-related damage.
What we're looking for is clarity in the obligations of the states, what that entails, and what the underlying ramifications of what happens when states are affected, and what countries need to do to be able to respond to their obligations to deal with the issues that arises from the climate crisis.
It's hoped the UN's General Assembly resolution, meant to create a legal framework to hold polluting countries to account, will do just that.
But Sven Harmeling is Global Policy Lead on Climate Change at Care International. He's with us now. Sven, it's a while since we've seen you. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you very much.
I'm curious to get your first response to this UN General Assembly resolution on an issue that the US did not support. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a very important milestone, and maybe in a couple of years we will look back and see how this has really helped advance international law and really, hold polluters accountable in terms of CO2 emissions, but really also bring a perspective what are the obligations from countries when they emit CO2, which affects other countries, other individuals. And yes, the US was not on board, but I think what we see is that there's been overwhelming majority of countries in the UN which have supported this. And I think it's a very strong signal.
Yeah, no doubt this is an important step. It's an important issue. Small countries, small island nations, for example, like Vanuatu, have been saying, listen, we are experiencing the brunt of this crisis. We need help and we need to hold you accountable. But again, countries like the US did not support. They have massive sway across the world. I mean, it's only a matter of time that other countries, other powerful countries, follow suit. Do you think the US not supporting is a hurdle that obviously needs to be crossed, and soon?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we also have to see this, of course, what the UN General Assembly decided is on to ask the International Court of Justice for a legal opinion, right? So this is only the first step in this trajectory. And once that legal opinion will be there, I think there will be a lot of discussions. What does it mean? What to do with it? And of course, it's only one element in the broader context of advancing climate action. And there are many elements where the US is part of the diplomatic game. But of course, there are concerns among the very, let's say, historically large polluters that they may be, let's say, in the focus of some of the discussions in the future. So it's not surprising necessarily that the US hasn't supported this, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. And as I said, it's a first step, and we have to see how this evolves further.
All right, point taken. Always great getting your perspective. Thank you for pairing with us here on Just 2 Degrees. Well, Norway has come under fire from several international environmental organizations like Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund. They've responded to what they say were incorrect statements by Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre about deep-sea mining and whether it can be done in a way that does not pose a threat to ocean life. But it is a tough issue to tackle. Dominic takes a closer look at the controversy.
Norway's oil and gas reserves make it one of the wealthiest countries on Earth. But as the planet moves away from fossil fuels, the country has assumed a leading role in the race to mine the ocean floor for metals. Norwegian authorities say the country's seabed has magnesium, niobium, cobalt, and other minerals needed for the production of solar panels, wind turbines, battery storage, and grid infrastructure, all necessary for the green transition. What concerns environmentalists is the effect deep-sea mining would have on ocean biodiversity. Norway plans to mine more than 3,000 square kilometers of its national waters. That's an area the size of Germany. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr says the process can be done without harming marine life. But his statement has been denounced by more than 700 scientists from at least 44 countries. Norwegians, too, are upset. During public consultations on the issue, they demanded the government halt explorations and support a ban on deep-sea mining. But that's not likely to happen just yet. There are no international mining regulations in place, but a summit held in Jamaica in March hopes to finalize deep-sea rules by July. Dominic Branomondi, Just 2 Degrees.
Earlier, I spoke with Jessica Battle of the No Deep Seabed Mining Initiative, one of many organizations in strong opposition to Norway's possible ocean mining activities. I started by asking her about minerals like cobalt and nickel, which are used to produce wind and solar energy.
Why is your organization so against that?
Well, we are not against the renewable energy switch, of course, that we are absolutely not against. That is absolutely necessary. But what we would like to see is a proper and rigorous assessment as to where these minerals need to come from. And according to a study that we commissioned and which was released in November, they definitely do not need to come from the seafloor. And most of them can come from smarter technology uses, recycling, circular economy investments over the next decade.
Well, the government did an impact assessment before all of this began. And according to their assessment, if I can quote it here, it says critical minerals are abundant in marine deposits and can secure supply with a low environment footprint. I guess you doubt that.
Yes, they can't say that. We know so little about these environments, so it is impossible to predict the environmental footprint of such activities in the deep sea today.
Do you know a lot about how deep mining would have to be? Not just that, but what kinds of animals, what kinds of marine ecosystems are down there?
Yeah, well, the depth that we're talking about in international waters is several thousand meters or several kilometers down. And I believe it's the same here in Norway, from about 1,000 to 3,000 meters or so. At these depths, there are very unique life forms. So you'd have a lot of different invertebrates, so non-backbone species, if you wish. But you also have fish. You'd have many microorganisms, and these are very together. They are unique ecosystems which provide for the basis for the food chain in the ocean, but are also providing for carbon sequestration, for example. So really important in climate regulation. I think what's really interesting here is the microorganisms, so the bacteria, the other very tiny organisms that we can't see with our own eyes. If you have heard about the recent research about our own human gut and how important the biome, the ecosystem really in our own guts are for our global health as human beings, you can say the same thing about the microorganisms in the deep sea. They are crucial for the health of the ocean and for the deep sea. So if you destroy that delicate balance, then you risk big effects on the ocean ecosystem and on ocean health. And then the last thing I'd like to say about this is that these ecosystems, because they're very far down into the sea, they are very sensitive to disturbance because they have not been disturbed for millennia. And this means that there's very low resistance to change. So then you can imagine if you go down there and you mine, you dig up sediments, you crush rock, you take off the hydrothermal vents, these smokers and these vents that you might have seen in the deep sea that are some of the targets that Norway want to go after, plus seamounts, where you would basically cut off the top of underwater mountains.
So depending on where you are, your home might soon be powered by wind turbines. The Global Wind Energy Council has big news for the industry, with the CEO saying 2023 will mark the start of a decisive turnaround for wind power worldwide. It's not just about using renewable energy, but could be key to economic growth in developing countries. Sarah has more.
Wind energy. It's appealing because it's clean, and everywhere the wind blows, doesn't really matter, it generates energy. While fans use electricity to make wind turbines do the opposite. Wind turns the blades around a rotor, that spins a generator, and creates electricity. But the production of wind power has some issues. People living around massive turbines complain about the noise. They also scare wildlife, take up a lot of space, are not aesthetically pleasing, can only work in certain places, and depend on the weather. And 2022 wasn't the best year for wind energy. Growth was down 17% from the year before. The Global Wind Energy Council explained the industry stalled thanks largely to inflation, high costs, and problems with permits and licenses. The paperwork is tedious. There are different requirements for different turbines and locations on the local, federal, and national level. Inspections, planning, land use, building, installation, zoning, environmental permits, and more.
We found generally that there are quite similar barriers in all countries. I mean, this includes countries that are anywhere in the world, not just emerging economies, of just getting things right to enable wind to be built out.
A global industrial revolution is underway.
But the industry also projects growth in the coming year, hitting 1 terawatt or 1,000 gigawatts of wind energy capacity worldwide. The goal is to double that by 2030. What's behind the expected boom? Concerns over climate change, as well as energy insecurity brought on by Russia's war with Ukraine, have driven demand for renewables. Incentives for growth include reduced inflation via the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. The EU has committed to sourcing more than 40% of its energy from wind and solar energy by 2030. China has pledged to increase its primary power consumption to 25% renewable energy by the same year. An expansion in developing countries is seen as key for them to deliver on climate goals and grow their economies.
And the benefits are large in terms of CO2 reduction, in terms of pollution reduction, in terms of job opportunities, particularly sustainable jobs, long-term jobs that are going to go on into the future.
Researchers from the US-based National Renewable Energy Laboratory say the 2030 goal is within reach.
And we conclude that that would take maybe 6 to 9 years to really build the full supply chain. But that being said, I think the assumption that we put in place in that report was that at the start of that 6 to 9 year window, all the decisions have basically been made. So people know who's building the facilities, where they're building them, how many of them we need to have. And I think that's kind of the very uncertain aspect of that at the moment.
Statistics show the industry met less than 7% of global energy demand in 2021. There's a lot of room for growth, but it'll take much more than favorable winds to get there. Sarah Balter, Just 2 Degrees.
And here to speak to us about wind power and other renewables, Executive Director of REN21, Rana Adib. Rana, it's good seeing you. Thank you for appearing on Just 2 Degrees. Before we get to your organization's study on renewables, just a comment on Sarah's report there. Are you happy with how the wind energy industry is progressing?
think indeed we see that the wind energy industry is progressing positively, given the fact that we are actually all facing, and all economic sectors are facing, a poly crisis. But as you can also see, even though today it's very clear that we need to phase out fossil fuel because 80% of the total final energy demand is still depending on fossil fuel, it's also clear that we need a massive acceleration and not a drop of 17% installation capacities from 2021 to 2022. The reality here is that the sector is ready. The Global Wind Energy Council is a member in REN21, and we see that there is a lot of ambition of the industrial sector. But what is important today is that the governments clearly ensure that there is the right policy frameworks in place, that permitting challenges are being addressed, and that the sector also has the capacity to really grow and invest in new manufacturing capacities. So I think the message to the government here is renewable energy in general, but also in particular wind as well as solar photovoltaics, need to move into the center not only of energy policies or climate policies, but also industrial policies and trade policies.
That is so hard right now. We're in the middle of an energy crisis. The war in Ukraine has resulted in these soaring oil and gas prices. Your company published the first module of its international Global Renewable Status Report, and in it, it highlights the fact that these soaring fossil fuel prices and risks of energy shortages, combined with stronger climate commitments, have increased renewables quite a bit, obviously. But where do renewables fit into this, this equation where the energy industry is still so highly subsidized by governments?
Mm-hmm. So I think what is really interesting, so this report, the first report we're launching, is part of a collection, and we're specifically looking into the energy consuming sectors. So industry, buildings, agriculture, and transport. And what is interesting here, I think we identify from the demand side that there is a new attention to renewable energy. Why? Because those energy-consuming sectors are facing actually the energy crisis, the inflation you have pointed out, but also questions on the security of supply. And they identify today renewable energy as a resilient, reliable, stable, and also affordable solution. So we see, for instance, that industry is relocating in areas where there is a lot of renewable energy potential. And this creates a very interesting momentum. So the question is this momentum enough? Certainly not, because the governments need to have very clear attention to support the renewable development on the supply side, accompany the energy consuming sectors to move away from fossil fuel to renewable energy. And obviously phasing out fossil fuel subsidies is part of the equation, because this actually means that the energy consumers are not paying the right price for the fossil fuel energy, and as such,
this is going to be a hard fight. The fossil fuel industry has been highlighting the problems with renewable energies. For example, it's predicted that by the early 2030s, large amounts of annual waste are anticipated in the renewable sector, solar, wind power, and could total 78 million tons by the year 2050. Are renewables, as the fossil fuel industry says, developing into a dirty problem in the future?
I think that's very easy to say when you're coming from a sector, or speaking from a sector, the fossil fuel sector, that is responsible for 75% of the CO2 emissions. I think it's probably rightly said to invite the sector to make sure that those are being addressed. Obviously, any infrastructure, any technology has an impact. That's a reality, a social impact and environmental impact. And the industry players, so renewable energy, or REN21, is representing the overall renewable energy sector with governments, industry, civil society, and science and academia. And there is a lot of best practice, I think, a lot of ambition in developing the right standards and ambitious standards collectively to ensure that the impacts of renewable energy and the technologies are limited and are framed in a good way. And I think that is really something that is, there is a clear awareness, there is a clear ambition, and a lot of work going. Just as an example, recently, so during the last couple of months, the International Hydropower Association, for instance, has developed with development banks, with governments, with civil society organizations, an international standard, a sustainability standard, and a first hydropower plant has been approved under this certification. So there is lots of things happening. I'm not saying that there is no impact, but it's very clear that the benefit when we're looking into climate, the benefit when we're looking into sustainable development, but also the possibility of empowering many to participate and benefit from renewables is really something that is weighing in the balance.
Rana, it was great seeing you. Come back anytime, all right? And that's how we end this episode of Just 2 Degrees. You can find us on YouTube for more climate content. Until then, see you next time. Bye.